Behind the steel walls of Tamms Supermax, Illinois' most secretive prison, a process unfolds that few outside the system have witnessed. It is a procedure cloaked in silence, yet it defines the lives of those who enter. The transfer into Tamms is not just a journey, it is an initiation into isolation. From the moment an inmate is selected, a complex choreography begins, designed to strip away the ordinary and prepare them for the extreme confinement that awaits. Inmates are first notified, sometimes with little warning, that their lives are about to change. Guards approach with a quiet authority, carrying the weight of regulations and strict routines. Every movement is monitored, every step calculated. The inmates' belongings are minimized, personal effects are reduced to the essentials. Even clothing is standardized, a symbol that individuality is no longer the priority. The moment an inmate learns that they will be transferred to Tamms Supermax is often sudden, even jarring. For many, there is no gradual preparation or extensive explanation, just the stark reality that their daily life in the general prison population is about to end. This notification can come in the form of a written notice slipped under a cell door, a brief conversation with a corrections officer, or a formal meeting with prison staff. Regardless of how it is delivered, the message carries a weight that penetrates every aspect of an inmate's life, immediately replacing routine with uncertainty. Psychologically, this initial notification can be devastating. Inmates are suddenly faced with the knowledge that their freedom, limited though it already is, will be further restricted. The prospect of entering a Supermax facility is often associated with total isolation, extreme surveillance, and minimal human contact. For some, the notification triggers a flood of anxiety, fear, and anger, emotions that are compounded by the lack of clarity about the process and what awaits them. Even those who have heard rumors about Tamms may find the reality more intimidating than anything they imagined. Once the inmate receives the notice, the procedural machinery of the transfer begins immediately. Prison staff review the inmate's record, noting behavioral history, past disciplinary actions, and any known risks. This assessment helps determine not only the timing of the transfer but also the security measures that will accompany it. Every decision in this phase is calculated to maintain control and minimize the potential for disruption, and the inmate becomes a subject in a highly regulated process over which they have little influence. The anticipation of transfer can dominate an inmate's thoughts for days, sometimes weeks. Daily routines are suddenly disrupted as they mentally prepare for the move. Sleep patterns may be affected, meals may become tasteless, and interactions with other inmates and guards take on new weight. Fellow prisoners may offer warnings, speculation, or stories of life inside Tamms, creating an atmosphere thick with fear and uncertainty. In this way, the notification itself becomes more than a simple administrative act. It begins the psychological conditioning for life under Supermax confinement. In some cases, the transfer notification is delivered personally by a high-ranking corrections officer. This adds a layer of formality and authority, emphasizing that the decision is final and unchangeable. The officer may explain basic logistical details, such as when the transfer will occur, what items the inmate may bring, and what procedures they will face during the move. However, most of the explanation is vague, leaving much to the imagination and fueling anxiety about the unknown. The combination of certainty in timing and uncertainty in experience creates a tense psychological space for the inmate. Family and outside communication are also affected at this stage. The inmate may have limited ability to inform loved ones in advance, and any messages that do go out are subject to scrutiny and delay. For those with supportive networks, this can add an additional layer of stress and guilt as the inmate anticipates worrying their family or friends. The isolation that awaits at Tamms begins to cast its shadow even before the physical transfer occurs. Security considerations are paramount in this pre-transfer period. Staff may increase monitoring, restrict movement within the prison, and conduct additional searches to prevent incidents during the transfer. Inmates may notice a subtle shift in behavior among the guards, heightened vigilance, more frequent checks, or stricter enforcement of minor rules. All of these measures serve as both protection and psychological preparation, signaling that the transition to Supermax will be unlike anything they have experienced before. Finally, the notification phase is a deeply human moment within an institutional process. It marks the intersection of authority and vulnerability, control and fear, preparation and uncertainty. For the inmate, it is the first step in a journey that will test mental resilience, adaptability, and patience. Every glance, every instruction, and every decision in these early days is imbued with significance, setting the stage for the isolation and structure that await at Tamms Supermax. Once an inmate has been notified of their transfer to Tamms Supermax, the prison begins the meticulous process of preparation. This phase is not just about logistics. It is a psychological and physical transition designed to strip away the familiar and introduce the inmate to an environment where control and uniformity reign. Personal belongings are scrutinized and minimized. Items deemed unnecessary or potentially disruptive are removed, leaving only the bare essentials, often limited to hygiene items, a few letters, and basic clothing. Every object taken is a reminder that life at Tamms will be governed by rules rather than personal choice. Clothing is another area of strict standardization. Inmates are issued uniforms that are functional, plain, and easily monitored. Individuality is deliberately suppressed, colors, styles, and personal preferences are removed. This visual uniformity serves multiple purposes. It reinforces the authority of the institution, reduces the potential for conflict, and immediately signals to the inmate that personal expression is no longer a priority. The uniform becomes both armor and a symbol of submission to a rigid system. The preparation process also involves medical and psychological checks. Staff ensure that the inmate is physically able to endure the journey and the conditions of Supermax confinement. Any medical needs, from medications to chronic care, are documented and adapted for the controlled environment. Psychological evaluations may also be conducted to assess mental resilience, stress tolerance, and risk factors. These assessments help determine how the inmate will be managed once inside Tamms, reinforcing the notion that the system is highly calculated and methodical. In some cases, inmates are given instructions about what to expect during the transfer. These are typically minimal, designed to emphasize compliance rather than comfort. Inmates are told where to go, how to behave, and what restrictions will be imposed during transport. Even the most mundane details, like where to place their hands or how to stand in line, are strictly regulated. Each small act of compliance begins the process of conditioning, preparing the inmate for the routines and protocols they will face inside the Supermax. Preparation extends to the environment around the inmate. Cells may be searched, personal spaces reorganized, and interactions with other inmates limited. The goal is to reduce variables and prevent disturbances during transfer. Even casual conversation may be monitored more closely, as staff anticipate that anxiety, tension, or defiance could escalate under the stress of impending relocation. The process is controlled, deliberate, and psychologically potent, shaping behavior before the physical move even begins. The inmate's mindset is also affected by these preparations. Being stripped of possessions, having routines altered, and receiving instructions about what is allowed and what is forbidden creates a sense of anticipation and apprehension. For many, the preparation phase is as stressful as the journey itself. Each step communicates a clear message. The world they are about to enter is structured, unyielding, and designed to enforce control at every level. Communication with prison staff during this phase is carefully managed. Questions may be answered in a measured, formal tone, but personal concerns or objections carry little weight. Inmates quickly learn that autonomy is limited and that compliance is essential. Even the smallest acts of resistance or hesitation can be noted and later used in assessments, influencing cell assignments or levels of supervision at Tamms. This reinforces the subtle, pervasive power of the system. Ultimately, the preparation and standardization process is a quiet but powerful transformation. By the time an inmate is physically moved, much of the psychological groundwork has already been laid. Possessions, clothing, routines, and expectations are all adjusted to fit the structure of the Supermax environment. Every measure, every rule, and every restriction is a calculated step toward acclimating the inmate to life in Tamms, a life defined by isolation, control, and the relentless structure of the CMAX system. Once preparation is complete, the inmate is moved toward the next phase, the actual transfer. Transportation to Tamms Supermax is far from a simple bus ride. It is a highly controlled operation that combines strict security measures with precise timing. Every vehicle, route, and staff member is carefully selected to minimize risk. The inmate is no longer just a prisoner. They are now a participant in a meticulously orchestrated procedure designed to maintain control from start to finish. The vehicles used for transfer are reinforced, secure, and designed for minimal contact between inmates and the outside world. Seats are arranged to maximize supervision, with each prisoner within reach of guards and surveillance systems. Handcuffs, leg restraints, and sometimes full-body restraints are applied, ensuring the inmate's movement is strictly limited. This not only protects the staff, but also reinforces the inmate's awareness that their freedom is suspended until arrival at the Supermax. Timing is critical in this phase. Vans arrive and depart according to a strict schedule, often during early morning hours to reduce exposure to the public and minimize potential disruptions. Each leg of the journey is planned with precision, including routes, stops, and contingency measures for emergencies. The logistical choreography is seamless from the perspective of the staff, yet for the inmate, every mile traveled heightens tension and anticipation. The isolation of the road mirrors the isolation awaiting them at Tamms. During transport, silence often dominates the cabin. Guards maintain a quiet vigilance, their eyes scanning constantly while voices are used only when necessary. The lack of conversation serves a dual purpose. It reduces the chance of agitation among inmates and begins the psychological conditioning for life in solitary confinement. The inmate is left to confront their thoughts, fears, and expectations, with only the hum of the engine and the occasional click of restraints marking the passage of time. Every detail of movement is monitored. Staff maintain logs, check restraints repeatedly, and ensure that inmates remain compliant with all instructions. Minor infractions, like shifting in the seat or speaking out of turn, are noted and may influence how the inmate is treated upon arrival. Even in transit, the inmate exists within a highly controlled environment, where freedom is strictly limited and every action carries consequences. The journey is also designed to psychologically prepare the inmate for the stark environment of Tamms. As the vehicle travels away from familiar surroundings, the inmate is removed from any sense of the general population, friends, or routine interactions. The isolation begins subtly, with each mile increasing the sense of detachment from the world they knew. This slow, controlled separation amplifies the impact of arrival at the Supermax facility. Staff coordination during transportation is critical. Guards communicate constantly through radios, coordinating with control centers to ensure smooth passage. The system is designed to anticipate and mitigate any potential problems, from vehicle breakdowns to inmate agitation. The precision of these operations reflects a broader philosophy of control that permeates every stage of the CMAX system: predict, manage, and enforce. By the time the van approaches Tamms Supermax, the inmate has already been subjected to a process of containment, observation, and psychological conditioning. The journey itself is more than a transfer. It is a transitional experience that reinforces the inmate's vulnerability and the authority of the system. Every mile, every restraint, every silent moment prepares them for the extreme isolation and control that define life inside Tamms, making the arrival not merely a destination but the culmination of a carefully engineered process. Once the inmate is secured in the transport vehicle, the journey begins in earnest, a journey that is as much psychological as it is physical. The roads to Tamms Supermax stretch long and often desolate, winding through isolated highways and rural landscapes, away from the bustle of cities and the eyes of the public. This isolation is intentional. From the very first mile, the inmate is removed from familiar surroundings, leaving behind any sense of normalcy, comfort, or connection to others. Silence dominates the transfer, broken only by the mechanical sounds of the vehicle, the clinking of restraints, and the occasional directives from guards. The inmate has little to focus on besides their own thoughts, their fears, and the uncertainty of what awaits. For many, this solitude is unnerving. The mind begins to replay past actions, anticipate future consequences, and imagine the extreme confinement of the Supermax. Each passing mile amplifies the anxiety, creating a mental preparation for life in isolation that has only just begun. Physical restraints make movement impossible, forcing the inmate into stillness. Hands and feet bound, the prisoner cannot shift freely, stretch, or adjust their position. Even minor attempts to resist are met with immediate correction. This enforced immobility, combined with the long, quiet hours on the road, begins to condition the inmate to the strict limitations of freedom that define Tamms. The journey itself mirrors the confinement to come. Every action is observed, controlled, and restricted. The windows of the vehicle are small and often tinted, restricting visibility and interaction with the outside world. The outside landscape becomes a blur, reminder that the inmate is cut off from the familiar and the ordinary. Guards monitor constantly, maintaining authority through presence and observation rather than conversation. The environment reinforces the message that the inmate is entering a world where independence is removed and compliance is absolute. Conversations among inmates are minimal if they exist at all. Attempts to speak are often discouraged or directly prohibited. Even minor interactions are closely observed, reinforcing the sense that every behavior is scrutinized. The journey in isolation is both a literal and symbolic threshold, marking the transition from general prison life to the highly controlled, surveilled world of Tamms Supermax. The inmate's world is shrinking, reduced to the space of the vehicle and the thoughts within their mind. Staff maintain a constant vigilance, their attention divided between the vehicle, the inmates, and communication with the prison control center. Radios transmit updates, confirming that every mile of the journey is accounted for. Any incident, real or imagined, can trigger immediate response, emphasizing the high-stakes nature of the transfer. The inmate, aware of this scrutiny, begins to internalize the omnipresent authority that will define life at Tamms. Time itself seems altered during this journey. Hours stretch longer when confined to a small space with minimal stimulation. The monotony and silence heighten the inmate's awareness of their own vulnerability and lack of control. The external world fades, replaced by internal contemplation and the relentless presence of restraints and authority. This temporal distortion is a subtle precursor to the disorientation often experienced in solitary confinement. By the time the transfer reaches its conclusion, the inmate is mentally and physically prepared for the next stage, though not necessarily ready for its full intensity. The journey in isolation has already imposed a form of discipline, shaping their responses, tempering resistance, and acclimating them to an environment where freedom is limited and every action observed. It is not just a transfer, it is an initiation into a system where isolation is absolute and control is total. Upon arrival at Tamms Supermax, the inmate's journey transitions from the external isolation of transport to the controlled, enclosed environment of the facility. The first step in this process is the intake procedure, a meticulous and highly regulated series of security checks designed to assess, document, and contain the new arrival. This phase is a stark reminder that from this moment forward, every aspect of the inmate's existence will be monitored and controlled. The intake begins with identification verification. Officers cross-check personal records, photographs, fingerprints, and other identification details. This ensures that each inmate is accurately documented within the Supermax system and that no errors occur during processing. The precision of this stage reflects the larger philosophy of Tamms. Every detail matters, and absolute order is paramount. Even the smallest oversight could compromise security. Once identification is confirmed, inmates are subjected to thorough searches. This includes the inspection of all clothing, personal effects, and any items carried during transport. Contraband is confiscated immediately, and permitted items are recorded and stored according to strict protocol. The search is exhaustive, leaving no room for error, and underscores the institution's emphasis on control and safety. For the inmate, it is the first moment of complete vulnerability inside the facility, a demonstration of authority that cannot be challenged. Medical and psychological assessments often follow. Staff check vital signs, administer medications, and evaluate mental health to ensure the inmate is capable of handling the extreme conditions of Tamms. Officers document any pre-existing conditions, noting factors that may influence cell placement, supervision levels, or access to services. These checks, while procedural, have a psychological effect. The inmate realizes that their health, behavior, and even thoughts will be under constant surveillance. The assignment of a cell is another critical component of intake. Officers review behavioral histories, security risk levels, and other assessments to determine the inmate's placement. Cells are assigned not randomly but strategically, balancing the need for security, supervision, and containment. For the inmate, stepping into a cell is a moment of finality, a physical embodiment of the restrictions and solitude that will define daily life at Tamms. Every movement during intake is documented. Officers log times, procedures, and any behavioral responses. Surveillance cameras capture every action, ensuring that a record exists for accountability and future reference. The inmate quickly learns that their every gesture, word, and reaction is being observed and recorded, reinforcing the omnipresence of authority and the absolute structure of the Supermax environment. Interaction with staff during intake is formal and highly controlled. Inmates may receive minimal explanations about procedures or rules, but the tone emphasizes compliance rather than comfort. Questions are answered briefly and factually, leaving little room for negotiation. Even minor acts of hesitation or defiance are noted and can influence how the inmate is treated in the immediate days ahead. The intake process, therefore, serves as both an administrative function and an early exercise in behavioral conditioning. By the conclusion of intake and security checks, the inmate has been thoroughly processed, documented, and evaluated. The experience communicates a clear message: freedom and autonomy have been replaced by structure, surveillance, and control. Each step in this phase reinforces the authority of the institution and prepares the inmate for the rigorous, isolated life inside Tamms. It is not merely a procedure. It is the first full immersion into the controlled reality of Supermax confinement. As the intake process concludes, the inmate is escorted to their assigned cell, a small, austere room designed to enforce solitude. The moment the door closes behind them marks the transition from the structured supervision of intake to the isolation that defines Tamms Supermax. The environment is deliberately stark: concrete walls, minimal furnishings, a solid door with a small observation window. Every element is intended to reinforce the inmate's confinement and the absence of personal freedom. The adjustment to solitude is immediate and jarring. The inmate is alone, with only the sounds of their own breathing, the mechanical hum of ventilation, and the occasional footsteps of guards outside. The absence of social interaction is a deliberate psychological measure, meant to sever the routines of communication and social reliance that existed in the general population. Time becomes measured not by conversation or activity, but by the strict schedule imposed by the institution. Daily movement is tightly restricted. Inmates are allowed to step out of their cells only for brief periods, often for showers or controlled exercise in a confined cage. These excursions are monitored continuously, sometimes through remote observation, sometimes directly by guards. Even this limited mobility is structured to minimize contact and maintain control, reinforcing the inmate's sense of vulnerability and dependence on the system. Communication with the outside world is minimal. Letters, visits, and phone calls are highly regulated and rare, providing only intermittent contact with family or friends. For many inmates, this is one of the most difficult aspects of Supermax confinement, as the isolation extends beyond the walls of the cell into the relationships and support networks that previously offered comfort. The silence and distance are constant reminders of the inmate's separation from ordinary life. Meals are delivered directly to the cell, often through a slot in the door, and interactions with staff are brief and procedural. In this environment, the inmate's daily life is reduced to a cycle of routine: wake, eat, minimal activity, confinement, sleep. The absence of choice, combined with the monotony, amplifies the psychological strain of solitary confinement. Each day blurs into the next, reinforcing the sense of disconnection from the outside world. Observation and surveillance are relentless. Cameras, sensors, and regular guard checks monitor the inmate continuously, leaving little opportunity for privacy. The psychological impact of constant observation is profound. Inmates become aware that every action, gesture, and expression is being scrutinized, reinforcing the system's authority and conditioning behavior to align with strict rules and expectations. The environment is intentionally designed to minimize stimuli. Walls are bare, noise is limited, and personal items are restricted to essentials. Even sensory experiences, light, sound, and movement, are controlled to prevent potential agitation or conflict. This extreme reduction of environmental complexity reinforces isolation, creating a space where the inmate must confront their thoughts and emotions in solitude. By the time the initial hours of solitary confinement pass, the inmate begins to internalize the rules and rhythm of life inside Tamms. The extreme isolation, combined with constant observation, physical restraint, and a rigid schedule, creates a controlled psychological space. Here, the inmate's autonomy is minimal, compliance is paramount, and every day becomes a test of endurance and mental resilience. Solitary confinement is not just a condition, it is the defining structure of existence within the Supermax. Life inside Tamms Supermax is defined by a level of control few can imagine. From the moment an inmate arrives, every action is observed, recorded, and assessed. The guard's presence is constant but unobtrusive, a silent reminder that the institution operates on precision and oversight. Nothing is left to chance, and the inmate quickly learns that even minor deviations from expected behavior are noticed and documented. Surveillance is both technological and human. Cameras line the corridors and monitor every cell, capturing movements, gestures, and facial expressions. Sensors track the opening and closing of doors, and alarms are in place to detect any breach of protocol. Yet technology alone is not sufficient. Trained officers continuously monitor, interpret, and react to behavior, ensuring that the environment remains orderly and predictable. This combination of human and technological observation leaves inmates with little opportunity for privacy or spontaneity. The daily routine reinforces this control. Meals, exercise, and hygiene are scheduled to the minute. Inmates have no say over timing, duration, or sequence of activities. Every interaction with staff is structured, and even silence is monitored. The repetition of this rigid schedule conditions behavior, reduces unpredictability, and reinforces the omnipresent authority of the Supermax system. Over time, the inmate internalizes these routines, understanding that compliance is not optional but essential for survival. Rules are strict, comprehensive, and enforced consistently. Every cell contains clear instructions about conduct, restrictions, and privileges. Infractions, however minor, are recorded and can result in additional restrictions or disciplinary measures. This attention to detail ensures that the environment is predictable for staff and that inmates recognize the consequences of noncompliance. The system functions as a closed loop of observation, enforcement, and correction, leaving little room for error or deviation. Communication is carefully regulated. Inmates' voices are limited to controlled interactions with guards, legal counsel, or approved visitors. All correspondence is monitored, and even written messages are screened for content. By controlling communication, Tamms isolates inmates psychologically while maintaining a constant flow of information for staff. This creates a dual reality. The inmate experiences extreme isolation, while the institution maintains total awareness of thoughts, intentions, and behaviors. Every detail of the physical environment is engineered for control. Cells are designed to minimize contact, prevent concealment of contraband, and allow full observation. Doors, locks, and security measures are standardized to ensure uniformity and reduce risk. The architecture itself becomes an instrument of authority, reinforcing the message that the inmate's world is bounded, predictable, and strictly controlled. Guards are trained to maintain a balance of authority and predictability. Their presence is firm but procedural, emphasizing rules rather than personal interaction. This detachment is deliberate, It prevents favoritism, ensures fairness in enforcement, and reminds inmates that authority derives from the system itself, not from individual staff members. The result is a controlled environment in which behavior is guided by structure, surveillance, and consequence. Ultimately, systematic control and surveillance are the backbone of life inside Tamms Supermax. Every step, every glance, every action is accounted for. The environment leaves no room for improvisation, spontaneity, or escape from observation. For the inmate, this creates a world where survival depends on understanding, adapting to, and ultimately submitting to the omnipresent system of authority. It is the culmination of the transfer process, the point at which the inmate becomes fully integrated into the regimented, isolating, and psychologically intense reality of the Supermax system.